17. Chapter 13. We're going to talk about homeostasis. Maybe? There we go. Okay. I have a cut on my finger, so who knows where we're going. An individual cannot live unless they can stay warm, find food, and find water. And of those three, the most important one is finding water. Of course, you can freeze to death, I guess, but you can live without food much longer than you can live without water. The body maintains an elaborate monitoring system to ensure that the individual is aware of thirst, warmth, and hunger. It is so important to the body that the body maintains a means of monitoring for each system. And this is known as a redundancy. So we have all these redundant systems in our body telling us how hungry we are, how much water we have or need, and telling us about how warm we are. And right now, I'm kind of cold. I've got my sweatshirt on. My wife was just complaining about how cold it is in the house. We are in spring. We are almost in April, but March, which when it came in like a lion, has stayed like a lion, and this is the first day that we haven't had a lot of wind. The nervous system coordinates these regulatory systems. The brain closely monitors temperature, water supply, and nutrient supply by using a variety of neural and hormonal mechanisms to keep them within the critical range. If we have excess of any of the three, our bodies have ways of shedding the excess to maintain our level of homeostasis. And this is usually done without our knowledge. Now, the interesting thing is some people maintain homeostasis a lot more readily than other people. I can be in a very warm environment and have on lots of clothes, and my body seems to adjust to the hot temperature and the fact that I have on several layers of clothes. The opposite is not always true. I'm usually okay, but I get cold a lot faster than I get hot. I'm not exactly sure why. I sweat a lot. I'm one of those people that you would call a sweater. When I exercise, I do sweat a lot, and some people don't. Some people don't sweat very much at all. I lift every Monday and Friday, or thereabouts. Every 3 or 4 days, I'll go to the gym, and most of the people in the gym either rest enough between lifts, or they don't expend enough energy. Anyway, I'm about the only one in there with any sweat on them, and I'm dripping. So I'm assuming that I am normal. I've been an athlete all my life, and I'm 75. I'll be 75 in October. I like to practice calling myself the next year, because so that when it does happen, it's not such a shock. I'm 3/4 of a century old. I'm in my 75th year. Seeking either shelter, food, or water is to seek a primary need, and those are the three primary needs. This type of behavior is known as motivated behavior. The systems used to regulate temperature, body fluids, and metabolism are negative feedback systems. When an individual goes beyond a set point in the level for one of the primary needs, the brain is informed of the negative level, like a warning light on a gas gauge. And it says, "You're hungry, stupid, go eat." It says, "You're cold, stupid, go find shelter." Or, "You're thirsty, dummy, find something to drink." Because we are constantly burning fuel, utilizing and breathing out liquid, and entering into different environments, the process of maintaining homeostasis is a constant balancing act. And of course, most of you live in Arizona or New Mexico. And Arizona is a really good example of an environment where you go from extreme heat to relatively cold temperatures. If you go during the summertime, of course, when your temperatures are well above 100, and all of your buildings are air conditioned, a lot of times the temperature will drop 30 or 40 degrees going from one environment to the next, going from inside to outside. So you know how difficult this is. My daughter, even in the hottest summertime, will always carry a long-sleeved jacket or something into any building that she goes into because very often they over air condition things. And of course, regulating temperature air conditioning is not all that easy. Mostly they just blow as much cold air as they possibly can into the building and hope that it maintains a fairly cold temperature, a cool enough temperature for everyone. But then again, some people like a warmer environment, and some people like a colder environment. So it's kind of a shooting match. You never know. One guy might like it at 78 degrees, and the next person comes in and thinks that they're walking through the Arctic without any clothes on. Losses that we must have that we cannot get around are known as obligatory losses, and they obviously require constant monitoring of primary need levels. Cooling not only slows the action of molecules, but it slows the chemical reactions in the cells as well. A good example of this is, and you may not realize this, but in the wintertime, your hair grows slower than it does in the summertime. I know this because I shave every day. And in the wintertime, I barely have any beard at all to shave, but I still shave every day. In the summertime, my beard will be much heavier. And because of that, if I don't shave every day, then I look pretty scruffy. But then again, scruffy seems to be in right now. You can't turn on the television without seeing somebody that's scruffy. Even the newsmen have scruffy beards, as strange as that may seem. Anyway, it's going to be interesting because, I've lived for a long time, and we've gone from, long hair to really short hair to long hair to really long hair. And then, we bounced all over the spectrum with facial hair and mustaches. And you can tell when you're looking at a rock band from, from the 1960s or 1970s because the Beatles started that whole Beatle haircut thing. Before that, everybody had short hair and they had their hair swept back and combed, and they put, Brill cream in their hair. And then they started having crew cuts and flat tops. And then the Beatles came along and they started having that long hair, and then it got even longer than that. Then everybody started wearing facial hair. So it's really kind of interesting. You just about can tell what era you're looking at when you look at it, when you watch a movie, as to how long the hair is for men. If you're watching a movie from the 1970s, you go, "Oh yeah, look at his hair," or he's got this horrible, horrible mustache. Anyway, so your hair grows longer in the summertime than it does in the winter. You may have to trim your fingernails every week in the summertime, but in the winter, it's still about every week. But it may be twice a week if it's in the summertime. Enzyme systems in most mammals and birds are most efficient at normal temperature. That's 98.6 for humans. For dogs, it's like 101 degrees is normal temperature for them. Cats are about the same, at close to the same level. You guys can tell me. Those of you who do any animal husbandry, have pets, you can probably tell me better than I can. I don't. I've been around pigs and cows and not sheep, but you guys probably have been, and so you know what a normal temperature is for a cow or a a goat. Any higher temperatures and protein molecules do not bind properly and thus cannot function as they should. And this is one of the reasons why when an individual has a fever, especially if it's a smaller child, we try to break that fever as quickly as we possibly can because potentially they're doing damage to their brains. At a very high temperature, the amino acids and the proteins break apart and begin to fuse together at random. The protein in the brain is especially susceptible to high temperatures. I'll tell you what, this is kind of silly. Here, let me see what normal temperature for a dog. 101 degrees to 102 degrees. How about for a cat? 101, about the same. Like I said, wow, I'm really smart. Whoops. Let's try cow. 101 degrees again. How about for a goat? 102 to 103, a little bit warmer. How about for a sheep? 105 to 103. And last but not least, for a pig. We have pigs around here, 101 to 104. So there you go. How about for a chimpanzee? No, monkey. Monkey. Rectal temperature. Oh, that's in centigrade. Well, I'm not going to convert it. Oh, they're different. Okay. How about for a chimp? Centigrade again. Doggone it. Okay. I can't automatically convert. Okay, so we know that humans are 98.6. I'm a little bit lower than that, strangely enough. My normal temperature is somewhere between 96 and 97 degrees. I don't tell everybody that I'm not a human. I'm a subhuman with a cold temperature, a cold heart. What are we doing? Okay, so at very high temperatures, the amino acids and the proteins break apart and begin to fuse together at random. The protein in the brain is especially susceptible to high temperatures. Prolonged high fever can cause brain centers that regulate heart rate to die, thus killing the patient. And that's a good reason to break the fever as quickly as you can. At very low temperatures, the cellular membranes are disrupted by the formation of ice molecules, and even when thawed, they cannot reform properly. One of the reasons I used to work with an individual that if his children had temperatures over 100 degrees, they would start having seizures. Now, my kids never had that problem, but his kids were very, very sensitive to high temperatures. Whoops. Here we go. Warm-blooded animals generate heat from the inside to keep themselves warm and thus are referred to as endotherms. Endotherms generate heat by burning food in the body, a process known as metabolism. Heat inside the body is measured in kilocalories. 1 kilocalorie is enough to raise enough heat to raise the temperature of 1 liter of water 1 degree centigrade. An adult can burn as many as 600 kilocalories per hour with strenuous exercise, but only 60 kilocalories when resting. So that's one of the reasons why sedentary people have a difficult time maintaining their body weight. Because if they don't eat, I guess they'll be okay. But since they only have 1/10 the energy that they are expending, then they will gain weight very readily. Kind of interesting, when we were living in Montana, it's really, really cold in Montana in the wintertime. We had a 3-sided barn called a pole barn. And in the wintertime, the horses would get in the corner of the barn, and we would feed them extra feed. That's when we gave them oats. And the reason we did that is so that they could generate enough heat to keep each other warm. And then we had two horses, and they'd stand really close to each other and keep each other warm. And as long as we fed them lots of or enough grain, they had no problems with the cold, and they didn't get cold at all. But it's really kind of interesting. I had a friend who had come up from New Mexico to Montana to teach chemistry, and he had New Mexico horses, and he said that one of his problems was he had to put blankets on his horses in the wintertime because they were not the kind of horses that grew their fur didn't grow thick enough to keep them warm during the wintertime. They weren't acclimated to the cold weather, and he was there for about 5 years, and I guess the whole time his horses never did grow that extra layer of hair to keep them warm, like Montana horses do. We could have, if we hadn't fed them extra grain, they still would have stayed warm enough to survive. And that's what happens with the cattle. One of the things up there, it's really kind of there's not a lot of water. So what the animals learned to do up in Montana was eat snow. They ate snow, and if you take an animal that's not used to snow and is not used to that type of environment, they won't know to eat snow. So when we moved down to Iowa from Montana, we brought a couple dogs with us from the reservation up there, and when we got new dogs, the Montana dogs taught the Iowa dogs to eat snow in order to get something to drink. And now it's kind of interesting. As we get new pets, they teach the other animals how to eat snow. Kind of cool. At rest, the brain accounts for about one-third the heat generated by the body. As activity increases, the brain continues its level of heat production, but the muscles can increase their heat production tenfold. Humans can create heat by increasing metabolism, by breaking down brown adipose tissue, by shivering, and by increasing blood flow by constricting blood vessels. And of course, this is what you do when you get cold. All of these things happen. Brown adipose tissue is found around vital organs in the thorax and around the cervical and thoracic levels of the spinal cord. And this is what it looks like. This is brown adipose tissue. This is what normal adipose tissue looks like. Under cold conditions, the sympathetic nervous system stimulates metabolism within the brown adipose tissue, which produces heat. Humans start shivering at 36.5 degrees centigrade, which is 97.7 degrees Fahrenheit, which starts in the face and spreads downward. And since my normal temperature is below 97.7, it's not like I'm shivering all the time. This is an average. This is an average. When the human body is hotter than is safe for the individual well-being, brain cells can be very quickly be adversely affected by the temperature if it isn't controlled. The body can cool itself through accelerated respiration by panting, perspiration to cool the skin, and dilation of the blood vessels to release heat through the skin surface. And of course, that's what the perspiration is supposed to do. It's supposed to cool you off. The human body doesn't seem to have just one thermostat, but three: the hypothalamus, the skin surface, and the body's core. Primarily everything but arms and legs. Now this is the core right here. And when you get cold, this is the core. So if you watch NCIS or any of the CIS television shows, they're always trying to determine when somebody died, and the way that they do that is by sticking a thermometer into the core. And usually what they do is take a temperature of the liver. The liver is right under your rib cage on the right side. And it's a fairly extensive organ. And for that reason, if you stick a thermometer through the skin and into the liver, then you can get a pretty good idea of what the temperature. You will get good temperature reading for your core. As evolutionary psychologists point out, humans have the same concentration of salt in our body fluid as the oceans of the world. It is therefore assumed that humans evolved from creatures in the sea who had to maintain a fluid and salt content similar to that of the sea. Thus, humans, as all animals, must not only monitor fluid levels, but also salt levels. Osmosis is a special case of diffusion. In this case, a large molecule like starch is dissolved in water. The starch molecule is too large to pass through the pores in the cell membrane, so it cannot diffuse from one side of the membrane to the other. The water molecules can and do pass through the membrane. Hence, the membrane is said to be semipermeable. Water can pass through, but the starch can't, since it allows some of the smaller molecules to pass through, but not others, the larger molecules. Except for deionized water, other forms of water that we might take into our bodies is in the form of a solution, a mixture of molecules of a solid, molecules, and water molecules. A solution in this case is referred to as a solvent, and the solid dissolved in it is referred to as a solute. Now, if you've taken chemistry, you know all of these things. I worked in the laboratory, and we had to determine if we had a solvent or a solute all the time. Normally, if we worked with water, it was deionized water, because if it was tap water, it had all kinds of minerals in it, and we couldn't use it. So we had to use clean water, and we had to use salt water that was at exactly the right level of the human body. Otherwise, it would have, well, you'll see what it would have done. So this is stuff that I learned in the laboratory. I took chemistry in high school, but it didn't really cover all of the medical chemistry that I would be doing for a number of years when I joined the military. Semipermeable membranes will block the passage of the solute, but allow the water molecules to pass freely from one side to the other. The force of pressure to pull water across a semipermeable membrane is known as osmotic pressure. We refer to the concentration of solute in a solution as the solution's osmolality. Sodium chloride is a solute that the human body must balance in order to maintain a proper fluid balance. The human body must maintain a proper level of sodium chloride in order to function properly. That level of sodium chloride is 0.9%, or 9 grams of sodium chloride dissolved in a liter of water. So if somebody gives you saline, if they give you a salt solution, say that they're trying to replace your fluids, what they will do is give you a salt solution, and the salt solution that they give you will be 0.9%. In other words, 9 grams of sodium chloride dissolved in a liter of water. So if you taste it, and the interesting thing is, if you've ever had saline, if you've ever had an IV that they were trying to replace your fluids, you got a salty taste in your mouth. It's really kind of freaky. And that's because the water in your veins is pure sodium chloride. It's not pure sodium chloride. It's 0.9% sodium chloride, or normal saline. This is referred to as an isotonic solution or as normal saline. Saline, of course, means salt water. So an isotonic solution is one that's perfect, and it should give you a perfect level of salt and water, salt and fluid, and that's what happens. So say that you burn yourself and they determine that you're a little bit dehydrated. They'll stick an IV of isotonic solution into your system. Now, we used to talk about isotonic solutions all the time, because when we did complete blood counts, and we had a select amount of blood, uncoagulated blood, of course, we would have to determine, how many red cells there were and how many white cells there were, and we needed an isotonic solution in order to mix it. We didn't want to take the blood in its pure form we needed to dilute it out so that it would actually run through our machines. So we had to dilute it out with an isotonic solution. Otherwise, and I'm going to show you in just a minute what would have happened to the red cells if you didn't have an isotonic solution. So if you ever need an IV because you're dehydrated, they will stick they'll give you an IV of normal saline or an isotonic solution. And this is the isotonic solution, 0.9% water. I'm sorry, sodium chloride. A person who arrives in the ER severely dehydrated must be given fluids to replace the fluid. Replace the fluid rapidly, but if they just gave the person water through the IV, it would rapidly adjust the osmolality, and that wouldn't work because they would they would give them too much. They wouldn't have enough salt in their system, so it wouldn't work. That they would have to give them saline. Therefore, the medical personnel would administer normal saline to the patient to replace their fluids. In this case, the individual probably has more sodium chloride in their system than they need, and it is said to be hypertonic. Too much water and not enough sodium chloride would be hypotonic. And hypotonic, you can actually kill yourself by having too much water in your system. And this is known as being hypercalcemia. And we've seen this with individuals that are running marathons. Sometimes they will try to hyperhydrate just before so they won't have to stop and get water at water stations. They will drink a lot of water, and sometimes they'll collapse and die. The reason they collapse and die is because they have made their system hypotonic. They don't have enough sodium chloride in their system, and it kills them. That's the way it works. Before it kills them, it makes them a little crazy. And that's because the brain's not functioning properly. So the synapses in the brain can't function. You don't have enough sodium chloride, not enough salt. Okay, this is the reason we have to use an isotonic solution is because we want to see this type of cell. This is what a normal red blood cell looks like. If we didn't mix it with an isotonic solution, we would get a hypotonic solution where the blood cell would fill up with water, just like this, or it would break. It would burst because it would have too much water in it. And that's known as a crenated red cell. I'm sorry, this is a crenated red cell. This is the hypertonic solution. If it's not isotonic, it's got too much salt in it, this is what will happen to the red cell. So in order for us to determine what the red cells look like in somebody's body, we need to use an isotonic solution. If it has too much salt, it collapses in on itself and looks just like that, crenated red cell. And if it has too much, not enough salt, then it becomes hypotonic, fills up with water, and it can burst. And we used to see this all the time. Actually, we didn't see it all the time because we always used isotonic solutions. But if we were looking at somebody's blood, we would look for crenated red cells, or we would look for hypotonic cells. That might mean that they were either dehydrated, if they had any crenated red cells, or that they were hypotonic, meaning that they had too much water in their system. And you didn't want to see either one of these things because this meant dehydration, this meant hypotonic. And this was a really serious problem. This is what you wanted to see. Okay. Internal cues that trigger thirst, hypovolemic thirst. Thirst is caused by low volume of fluid. Baroreceptors in the major blood vessels detect any pressure drop from fluid loss, usually caused by rapid loss of bodily fluids such as hemorrhaging, diarrhea, or vomiting. And diarrhea and vomiting, strangely enough, get rid of a lot of fluid, way too much fluid, and then you would be going into hypovolemic thirst, and you need to keep the blood vessels open. So you would give them, you would either give them blood or you would give them a saline solution. Osmotic thirst, high volumes of solute in the extracellular fluid. Osmoreceptors in the brain detect any increased osmolality of extracellular fluid. Hypovolemic thirst, when baroreceptors detect a drop in blood pressure from tension on the artery walls, the information is relayed to the autonomic nervous system. The blood vessels constrict to maintain proper pressure for consciousness. The brain also releases vasopressin. Vasopressin is another name for vasopressin is antidiuretic hormone from the posterior pituitary gland. Vasopressin acts on the kidneys to reduce flow of water to the bladder. And strangely, if you were in the desert and you hadn't had a drink for a while, then this is what would happen to you, hypovolemic thirst. So, and it's one trick that some people use in the desert. If you only have so much water, then one of the things that you can do is not to urinate, because so they will try to hold their urine. And a lot of times what will happen is you feel like you got to go, and then you don't feel like you got to go so bad anymore. And that's the reason is because the fluid is getting back into your system. Fluid from your bladder. Hypovolemic thirst, angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 constricts blood vessels. It triggers the release of vasopressin. It triggers the release of aldosterone. It acts on the preoptic nerve area of the brain to elicit the feeling of thirst. This is accomplished by the subfornical organ, one of the circumventricular organs around the open areas of ventricles of the brain where the blood-brain barrier are weak. And it tells you that you are thirsty and you need to find water. Osmotic thirst is more common than hypovolemic thirst, and as the name suggests, it has to do with an imbalance of sodium chloride in the extracellular fluid due to loss of water. Osmotic thirst is caused by perspiration, respiration, and urination. Since we're dealing with an increase of sodium chloride in the system, this form of thirst can be triggered by eating salty foods. And that's something that you have to look out for. If you lose a lot of weight, it's usually water weight that you're losing. You can lose water. If you eat too much salty foods, then you're gonna replace your fluids with. You need to replace your fluids because you have too much salty food in your system. So you'll fill up with on water or some fluid. Could be pop or whatever. He said, drinking. So the next thing that'll happen is you'll urinate a lot. Why? Because, well, you don't have that much salt in your system once you've digested all that salt and all the potato chips or whatever. And so now all of a sudden you're going to need to get rid of all that fluid, and you'll do that through urination. So usually when you lose weight, you're on a diet or something, a lot of the weight that you lose has to do with water weight. Osmotic thirst, research shows that humans have osmoreceptors in various areas of the preoptic area, the anterior hypothalamus, the supraoptic nucleus, the organum vasculosum of the lamina terminalis. And there you go. Sodium chloride balance in the body is very delicate. As we have noted before, hypertonicity or hypotonicity will cause cell destruction. When angiotensin 2 is released in the bloodstream, it acts on the adrenal glands to release the mineralocorticoid steroid hormone aldosterone. Aldosterone acts on the kidneys to conserve sodium, which in turn allows the individual to conserve water in the body. The more sodium you have, the more H2O you have in your body. And this is one of the reasons why, if you eat a lot of salty foods, you're going to gain weight. And all the weight that you're gaining is water. And as soon as you stop eating as much salt, consuming as much salt, your body weight will go down because you're not needing to maintain as much water in your system. However, humans cannot drink seawater. It is hypertonic and thus adds more salt than water, causing greater thirst. While humans have not evolved to handle hypertonic conditions, creatures that live in the ocean or are able to survive with little water have kidneys that can handle large volumes of sodium chloride. And that's why you have desert creatures that there's no water around. How in the world are there even creatures in the desert? And the answer is because they have kidneys that can handle large volumes of sodium chloride. Not only do organisms require water and warmth to survive, but they need food as an energy source. If this were the extent of our needs, humans could eat raw glucose and live very well. However, humans also require nutrients, chemicals that do not provide energy but are required for the proper functioning of the body. Some of the nutrients that we require are in the form of amino acids. Now, you might be surprised. I have known people that survived on beer, and that's all they drank. They just drank beer. They didn't eat anything. They didn't drink anything but beer, and they lived. They lived. They didn't die. Eventually, they did, but but they were able to survive on just beer. Now, how in the world does that happen? Well, the answer is there are nutrients in beer. Depending on what kind of beer it is, maybe not light beer, but regular beer has, besides having alcohol in it, it's got nutrients in it, and they were able to get enough nutrients to survive. Of the 20 amino acids required by the body, 11 are manufactured internally, and 9 must be attained through our diet. The 9 that we must attain through our diet are known as the 9 essential amino acids. Besides the essential amino acids, our bodies require 15 vitamins, several minerals, and a few fatty acids from our food. These nutrients are obtained when the body breaks down complex foods into simpler forms through the process of digestion. Most of the animals, especially humans, will build up stores of nutrients in their bodies. This is done because our anthropologic ancestors tended to go through cycles of feast and famine, and the individual who could not establish stores of excess nutrients, usually in the form of fat, would not survive to reproduce. All the energy we need to move, think, breathe, and maintain body temperature is derived in the same way. It is released as the chemical bonds of complex molecules are broken to form smaller, simpler compounds. To raise body temperature, we release the bond energy as heat. The amount of energy used is expressed in kilocalories. While not all foodstuffs provide energy, that which cannot be used is excreted, especially as solid waste. Available energy is used in one of 3 activities: processing of newly ingested food, about 33% of energy utilization; basal metabolism, maintaining the body, about 55% of energy utilization, and this is done. Most of your basal metabolism takes place while you are asleep. This is one of the reasons to get good sleep. If you're only sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night, it's not enough time to maintain your body. Activity behavior process, about 12%, and this is one of the reasons why dietitians will tell you, well, if you want to lose weight, exercise is good. You need to maintain your muscle mass, but you're not going to lose a lot of weight that way. The only way to do it is to reduce the amount of food that you eat, or only eat good foods. So the 2 things that you need, this is going to happen anyway. Your basal metabolism happens whether you're sedentary or you work out all the time, or you eat strange foods, or you eat pizza every night. It really doesn't matter. Your basal metabolism will always be right around 55%. So you're always burning 55% of your energy stores. But in order to lose weight, in order to produce kilocalories, one really good way to produce kilocalories is through exercise, And the other is by controlling the amount of and the number of calories you take in during the day. And that's the way you lose weight. You have to do them both. You can't just do one of them. If you control your diet without exercising, you're going to lose your muscle mass. Your body's going to start atrophying your muscles, feeding off the protein of your muscles, and you don't want that. The body uses glucose as an energy source, and so it breaks everything eaten into this form. If it can break into glucose, it's not food. It's just, I don't know what it is. It's not food. Glucose is stored in the body in the liver as a substance called glycogen. When ingested glucose is low, the body will release glycogen from the liver to keep the brain functioning. The release and breakdown of glycogen from the liver is controlled by two enzymes from the pancreas. Glucagon, which promotes the breakdown of glycogen to glucose in a process known as glycogenolysis, and insulin, which promotes the conversion of glucose to glycogen. When an individual has been without food for a prolonged period, either forced or due to dieting, they begin converting their adipose tissue into glucose in a process known as glycogenesis. At the same time, they will produce a secondary fuel called ketones, which can be used by the body and brain as fuel. Now, ketones stink. They smell really bad. So when somebody's burning ketones, you can smell it on their breath. So if somebody comes in and they are diabetic and they don't know it, then normally what will happen is their glucose level will not only be really high, but they will also be putting off ketones, and you can usually smell it. Now, I can say this because I worked in this field for a really long time, and it's not like I'm going around sniffing people, but ketones have a very distinctive odor. So I can tell when somebody's on a diet and they're actually burning fat because you can actually smell the ketones. Now, most of us don't smell things, hardly ever, but strangely, I do. And I can tell you ketones really stink. Long-term energy stores, or maybe I'm just the only one that thinks that it stinks. Long-term energy stores are in the form of fat cells or adipose tissue. Adipose tissue can be used for energy when the ready amount of glucose in the system has been depleted. Adipose tissue can be broken down into its simpler forms, fatty acids and glucose. Glucose is brought into individual cells through glucose transporters in the cell membrane. Glucose transporters can only function when they interact with insulin, except for brain cells, which do not need insulin to function. Otherwise, diabetes mellitus would cause such severe brain damage that it would be instantly deadly. There are three phases that the body must go through to be able to utilize glucose in its diet. There's a cephalic phase, a digestive phase, and an absorptive phase. The food itself acts as a stimuli. Sight, smell, taste. This evokes a conditioned release of insulin in the anticipation of glucose arrival in the blood. In this phase, the release of the insulin is regulated by the brain and is thus referred to as the cephalic phase. Your brain anticipates that you will be eating, and therefore it starts releasing insulin into the system. And this is a cephalic phase. Nothing's actually, you haven't even consumed anything yet. You see it, you smell it, and eventually you'll be tasting it, but you're not quite there yet. That's a cephalic phase. In the digestive phase, the food entering the stomach and intestines causes the release of gut hormones. This stimulates the pancreas to release more insulin. During the absorptive phase, glucose enters the bloodstream and special cells in the liver, the glucodetectors or glucostats, detect circulating glucose and signal the pancreas to release more insulin. Insulin allows the body to either utilize the glucose immediately or convert it into glycogen. the nerve that passes information from the liver to the brain and back to the pancreas, is the vagus nerve. And this is the vagus nerve here. It's a very long nerve. It goes from your brain down into your stomach. The vagus nerve runs to the nucleus of the solitary tract in the brainstem. Diabetes mellitus, which isn't type 1 or type 2, diabetes mellitus is type 1 and type 2. I apologize. I'm thinking diabetes insipidus. Okay. Diabetes mellitus is a lack of insulin which causes a disease called diabetes mellitus. So if your body isn't producing insulin, then you have diabetes mellitus. Type 1, which we used to call juvenile onset diabetes mellitus, is where the pancreas stops producing insulin. Though the brain can still utilize the glucose from the diet, the rest of the body can't, and so utilizes fat stores instead. Since most of the dietary glucose cannot be used, it passes through the system and is excreted in the urine. Glucose can also not be converted to glycogen and stored in the liver. Diabetics are hungry because the body tells them to consume energy, but they can't gain weight because they do not store glucose as fat. Treatment is to provide exogenous insulin. In other words, since your pancreas isn't producing insulin, you have to get it from outside. And that's how you treat type 1, what we used to call juvenile onset diabetes. It usually happened at birth. You were diabetic at birth, so you had to get artificial exogenous insulin, had to get insulin shots. In the old days, it was insulin shots. That's type 1, but now we've seen it, strangely enough, and I had never seen this before, but about, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 years ago, we started seeing adults developing type 1 diabetes, something we'd never seen before, or something that was extremely rare, hence the name juvenile, because it was only kids that had juvenile onset diabetes. And of course, when they became adults, they had it later on if you could maintain them. I had a friend that had juvenile onset diabetes, type 1 diabetes. He was born with it. And from time to time, he would need an infusion of glucose because he hadn't consumed enough glucose to utilize the insulin, and it made him go into insulin shock. So we would have to give him orange juice or a candy bar, usually a Hershey bar. Now this guy decided he wanted to be cool. I grew up with this kid, and he was a good friend of mine, and he wanted to be cool. And of course, this is in the 1960s. So he decided he would become a hippie. Well, hippies can't be diabetics. Everybody knows that. So he would, and of course, he wanted to drink beer, and he wanted to drink. Well, diabetics can't do that because it's really hard for them to maintain their, give themselves enough insulin to take care of the situation. So he became an alcoholic, and he was really, really smart. This kid was really, really smart. And he was able to adjust his insulin level. He'd give himself a little bit more if he was going to go out and get snockered that night. He was just a really interesting person. He died at 39. He died from his diabetes because he wasn't doing a very good job of controlling it. But yeah, he died when he was 39 years old because he wanted to be cool. Diabetes mellitus type 2, adult onset diabetes, what we used to call adult onset diabetes, because usually it had something to do with excess fat, and children were too active to develop this type of diabetes. But of course, now we've got kids, little kids, Sedentary kids that are developing diabetes type 2 at a fairly young age. Um, Weird. It's just the world is turned upside down. Okay, so we used to go with adult onset because you normally didn't develop that much fat in your system until you were a sedentary adult. Adult onset or type 2 diabetes is a milder form of diabetes. It usually does not affect an individual until they are adults, until they gain a little bit of extra weight. And some populations are more susceptible to type 2 diabetes than others. There are two causes of this type of diabetes. The cell gradually loses their sensitivity to insulin, and that seems to be genetically controlled. That's why some populations are more susceptible to it than others. And the other is that the body gradually decreases its production of glucose. This type of diabetes is more common among obese people and can usually be controlled by reducing the amount of glucose in the diet. The individual can also take medications that stimulate the pancreas to produce more insulin. And of course, that medication is metformin. Many people prefer the foods that they grew up with. People are drawn to sweet foods and fatty foods because their taste is satisfying. People are also drawn to salty foods because we need the sodium chloride to maintain homeostasis. People who are hyperhydrated might actually crave salt. People develop taste aversions to foods that poison them and make them ill, and this is known as a taste aversion. Most toxins are bitter tasting, and so we don't like bitter things. Some people suffer from neophobia, the fear of new foods, and this is my grandson. We can't get him to eat all these foods that are good for him, and we've warned him. You may be doing this as a kid, but when you're an adult, this is going to come back, and it's going to bite you in the butt. I have two nieces that had neophobia. They only ate French fries. I think I told you about this. They only ate French fries, um, cheese pizza, link sausage. Is that it? And drink. They could only drink Coke. If you tried to feed them milk, they'd vomit. Okay, so that's all they ate. So their mother would carry around a grease, a pot of oil that she could make French fries in. So when she went to visit my mother, I pissed my mother off to no end. But anyway, so both of these girls were that way. They were her two youngest, her two babies, and now they both have metabolic diseases that will probably kill them in their 50s, 60s, 50s or 60s. They both have metabolic problems, and then it's caused from now they eat all the food that they want now. I mean, they eat anything now, but it's because they were such picky eaters when they were children, and now they'll die young, or than they would have otherwise, probably. Anyway. One of the hormones released in the stomach and intestines is cholecystokinin or CCK, which comes from the gallbladder. Cholecystokinin is released if foods have a high content of fat or proteins, so that it can break it down. So if you eat a steak, your gallbladder will shoot out cholecystokinin into your stomach to help digest the fat. Cholecystokinin also stimulates the pancreas to release insulin. Cholecystokinin may be one of the satiety signals. However, you can't inject yourself with cholecystokinin to control your hunger because it makes you nauseous and it gives you cramps. Cholecystokinin in the presence of food activates the muscles of the intestines to work. Absence of food leads to a feeling of nausea and cramping. What else? If you have your gallbladder taken out, they should be telling you, I hope they tell you, that you need to control your fat intake after that. No more steak, no more hamburgers. Hunger triggers low insulin in the blood. It's an obvious trigger to eat. However, high insulin levels do not equate to satiation. Satiety appears to spread over various regions in the brain, including amygdaloid nuclei, the frontal cortex, and the substantia nigra. Leptin is a protein produced by fat cells that is secreted and informs the brain that the individual has had enough food. Obese people seem to be insensitive to leptin's message, and that is why they eat to excess. When leptin reaches the hypothalamic arcuate nucleus, it suppresses the release of several peptide neurotransmitters that induce eating. Neuropeptide Y, and the other is agouti-related peptide. I'm going to show you a picture of an agouti in just a minute. Leptin also enhances the release of peptide alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone. Okay, so where did the agouti-related peptide come from? Well, they were working with these animals from South America, and they realized that they had this special enzyme in their system, and so they started working with it, and they realized we had it too, and because they had found it with the agouti, then they started calling it the agouti-related peptide. And that's what an agouti looks like. As you can see, it's a rodent without a tail. And we were down in Guatemala, and we went out to Tikal, which is a Mayan city in Guatemala, in northern Guatemala, and there were agouti there. They look like big rats, is what they look like. Ugh, long-legged rats. But that's an agouti. Anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa are two disorders of hunger management that leads to extreme emaciation and even death. Anorexics commonly desire and think about food, but deny themselves sustenance. The basic problem seems to be a distorted body image where the individual sees themselves incorrectly as overweight when they are actually thin to the point of death. Anorexics tend to be slender of build to begin with, and the excessive dieting merely adds to the emaciation. And that's what they look like. I've been listening to Karen Carpenter lately. Karen Carpenter, they thought she died of a heart problem. She died of, she was controlling her weight. She looked like this. That could be Karen Carpenter. She looked just like that. And if you can see videos of her where she's singing, and by golly, she looks slender. And of course, this was back in the 1980s, and we hadn't really thought about anorexia nervosa at this point because it was relatively rare, but it became more popular with models and whatnot. And because of Karen Carpenter dying, from what we thought were complications of anorexia nervosa, it became more popular. It became more recognized. That's the word I'm looking for. It became more recognized. Now you can listen to her. She's got this fabulous voice, um, and and look at her, and you can see that she looks like a refugee from a Nazi concentration camp. Why am I talking about this? Okay, emaciation. Anyway, and people will lose weight in various ways. Some people over exercise, they binge, or they won't eat any food at all. She was taking thyroid. She was making herself hyperthyroid, and that's how she was maintaining her weight, her body weight. And when she died, she had 10 times the amount of thyroid medication in her system to make her lose weight. And people said she had anorexia, and they told her she had anorexia, and they told her she needed to do this in order to survive, and she just continued to do it. That's how implanted in your brain that you're too fat and you need to look skinnier is. Bulimics, on the other hand, tend to be a little plumper than anorexics. Bulimics are able to control their weight by purging the food from their system, either through exercise, vomiting, or laxatives. Bulimics will also go a little crazy from time to time and eat massive amounts of food at one sitting and then relieve themselves of it through vomiting. And this is known as binging and purging. And that is it. So, tell you what, let me show you a picture of, say, let me show you a picture of Karen Carpenter. Here we go. There we go. Karen Carpenter. There we go. You may remember her. You can see how skinny she is. I mean, ridiculously skinny. And this was through most of her life. She died in her 30s. But she was just skinny as a drumstick. She was a drummer. Lead sister. There you go. Look how skinny she is. I look at, yeah, that's her. Let's see. Dropped down to 77 pounds. In a battle versus anorexia. We're not going to get any better pictures. There she is. And she was like this, and nobody thought anything about it because we had individuals, models, who were doing exactly the same thing. You can see how skinny she is. And nobody did anything about it. Not enough to keep her alive anyway. Look how skinny she is. Anyway, okay. Okay, I'll talk to you next week. I don't know what we'll tackle next week. It's chapter 14. Next week it's sleep. Oh, my favorite. Okay. Talk to you next week.